Let's talk about Apple's spatial audio. First of all, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for checking out the video. Affiliate links and all that stuff are down below. If you need help with mixes, trying to improve at your craft, I do consulting and training for stereo and Atmos. There's links below that you can use and get in touch with me if that's something that interests you. But let's talk about Apple spatial audio. So I know with spatial audio, there are a lot of mixed feelings on it. I was just talking to a friend of mine maybe a week or two ago, and he had been listening to a playlist that was all Apple spatial audio, and he was raving about it. And at the same time, I remember, I don't know, a month or two ago, sitting in a green room during a gig, and one of the musicians I was talking to, not a fan of spatial audio. So I want to talk a little bit today about how Apple spatial audio works and what makes it different from the Dolby binaural. And I want to talk about some of the different things that people maybe don't like about it, because I don't think it's just one thing. There's actually some different components to it. And I think we'll look at some differences just sonically. We'll listen to a little bit of the difference between spatial audio and the Dolby binaural, and even just the straight up stereo of a mix. So let's jump in. So what is Apple's spatial audio? Spatial audio is a proprietary format for Apple for delivering immersive audio content to Apple devices, and primarily when I say Apple devices, I'm talking about their headphones. So it's AirPods, it's the AirPod Maxes, AirPod Pros, anything that's an Apple headphone. And there might be some other manufacturers that get it too, maybe Beats, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But that's basically what Apple spatial audio is. You really need an Apple device generally to listen to it. We're going to work around that today so you can listen to it even if you don't have AirPods. When it comes to headphone versions of Dolby Atmos content, the two main ways you can hear Atmos over headphones is Apple spatial audio. That's the one that everybody thinks is probably getting listened to the most right now as of when I'm making this video. And then Dolby has their own way. So the way the Dolby binaural works is Dolby does their own binaural re-render based on the entire Atmos mix. So all the objects and bed channels, they create this binaural from that. And for us as engineers, we actually have some control over how that binauralization works, because we can have different distance settings that we can apply to things, whether we want to turn it off completely, which makes it basically be just like listening to stereo, or we can add a near, mid, and far setting to it, which can help add some space and make it feel a little more immersive that way. Apple, on the other hand, they have a completely different method for creating the spatial audio version. Apple takes a channel-based version of the Atmos. So basically, they create a 714 render or re-render of the full Atmos mix, and then they apply spatialization to that channel-based version, the channel-based re-render, if you will, of the Atmos mix. The way this works is very similar to some of the virtualization plugins that are out there that sort of create a virtualized space for listening to things in headphones. Some examples of that. The first one that comes to my mind is like the Waves NX plugins, the Abbey Road Studio 3. I know it doesn't do immersive, like full immersive, but it'll do 5.1. That's a version of it. The main one that I think of when I'm thinking about plugins like this these days for Atmos would be the APL Virtuoso, where basically you're feeding it a channel-based re-render of your mix, and then it is creating a sort of virtual headphone experience. Neumann has one out nowadays too that works as well. The Rhyme from Neumann. All of these different plugins, basically, they're taking a channel-based re-render of the Atmos mix, and then they are applying some kind of spatialization to make it feel like you are listening to that mix in a room. And all of these do this to different degrees of success, and some of that is going to be personal taste as to which one you like. But the problem I know a lot of engineers have right now with Apple Spatial Audio is we have no say in how that virtualization works for someone listening, which is very different from like some of these plugins. Like if we go into Virtuoso, for example, if you want to use this to either check a mix or listen to it or like mix through it even to kind of hear what's going to happen, you can control some things like the ambience. They've got the RT60, which is reverb time, basically. Distance from the speakers in there. You can change. They've got some different room presets in there. I haven't played with this in a while, but I just remember there's a lot of customization in there that you can do. With Apple, there is no customization at all for either an engineer or even the users. Listeners listening to spatial audio, they just get what it is. And just to give you an idea of what that is, let's listen to something right now. So grab some headphones. Anything we do today is going to be on headphones. One thing I should mention here today is I am still on Sonoma for my OS. Why does that matter? Because we're going to use the Audio Movers BINaural renderer. What is it called? The BINaural renderer for Apple Music, which basically the way the Audio Movers plugin works is it taps into the spatial audio engine in the OS. Because this is a big key to how spatial audio works. Spatial audio isn't happening like up in the cloud. It's not happening like on some big Apple server. It happens on the device. And that's important to understand. And I think I'm not going to get ahead of myself. So the Audio Movers plugin I'm using today, it's tapping into the spatial audio in my OS. Why that matters is because whenever the OS gets updated, sometimes they are rolling out changes to spatial audio and how it sounds and how it works. And since I am now 2 OSs behind on this machine, my spatial audio abilities to monitor on this are 2 OSs behind, unlike my phone, which is on the latest iOS. So if I listened on that right now, it would let me hear, like, what is this algorithm? What is their spatialization doing today? But everybody's on different iOSs and Mac OSs and things like that. So this is going to give us one idea of this. And this spatialization stuff has changed, and it does continue to change. So keep that in mind. So to make this obvious, I'm going to swap back and forth between basically the stereo fold down of the Atmos mix, so straight up stereo, and Apple's spatial audio. So we're not going to listen to the Dolby binaural at all right now. This is just going to be stereo headphones to spatial audio. So grab your headphones and let's do this. So you can hear, it's like they just basically put a room reverb on the whole thing. I mean, it's more than just that, and something you might have noticed, and we'll listen to this again in a little bit, but the guitars, the way the guitars feel positionally kind of changes. Also sounds like there's a room reverb on them, but that's a whole other thing. And this is one of the things I think when it comes to spatial audio, some people don't care for it. They don't care for the reverb that Apple uses, basically. There are so many other options out there for spaces. The version that Apple has, not everybody's a big fan of it. I mean, if you roll back and listen to that a little bit, in fact, here, I'll just play a little bit of the spatial audio again. So you can just hear it's adding reverb to the drums, which can make them not seem as punchy anymore. The guitars have this extra room thing on it, which, I mean, that's not something that I'm intending to do. I like putting room sounds on things like guitars at times, but not as obvious as that. So that's one of the things with spatial audio I think people don't like. They don't like that reverb. I think it would be nice if Apple had some different options in the settings, you know, on your Mac, on your iPhone, to where you can adjust that. Because I think some of the people who don't like the room that Apple is using, I think if they just made it a smaller room, some people might actually dig that a little bit more. So that's one of the things that I think people don't like about Apple's spatial audio, if they don't like it, because some people really do like spatial audio. One of the other things I think people don't like about spatial audio, and this is actually my biggest pet peeve. When I listen to things in spatial audio, the thing that kind of sticks out to me the most is I hear data compression artifacts. For those of you who kind of remember when MP3s were new in the late 90s, that's what it sounds like sometimes to me. I hear these just data compression artifacts, not all the time, but when I hear them, they bug the crap out of me. And I think some of that is probably because when I'm listening to it on an Apple device, it's Bluetooth. My AirPod Pros, they're not the newest ones. They're not the original ones either. I think they're right in between, or maybe they are the originals. I don't know. But I hear what to me I think is kind of that Bluetooth correction. And I say I hear it there because when I'm listening on this Audio Movers version right here, I'm not hearing those same artifacts. So I think that is part of the stuff that I don't like about it. Now, there's one other side to this that I think some people may not care for, and I think it also plays into that data compression side of things. So one of the things I mentioned was spatial audio, that sort of creation, conversion, however you want to think of it, that occurs on your device. But what's getting sent to your device in the first place? When Apple is streaming Dolby Atmos content, they are streaming basically an MP4. If you have access to the Dolby Atmos renderer, the external renderer, if I load an ADM up in here and I go down to File, I can go to Export Audio, and right here is this MP4. To my knowledge and understanding, Apple is creating those MP4s from the ADMs that they receive from a distributor. They're creating those MP4s, and that's what Apple is streaming to your device if you're listening to Apple Music. The thing that's important to understand about those MP4s is they are data compressed. There is, well, if you've ever listened to Dolby Atmos on speakers from Apple Music, like you might have seen my article about how to do it without a receiver that went around a few years ago. You might have even soloed up some of those speakers. And if you start soloing up speakers when you're listening to Apple Music's Dolby Atmos, you'll hear some kind of data compression stuff going on in there. It's not obvious when you're listening to a full Atmos mix. I don't think I've ever noticed it in the context of a full mix. If I listen to an MP4 version from Apple and then listen to the actual ADM, I can hear a difference. The ADMs, they sound better, but it's not something where I can go, oh, I hear data compression. I hear these artifacts. That stuff hides really good in the full context of a mix if you're listening to the whole thing. However, here's my theory. When we have this sort of data compressed channel version of Dolby Atmos, because your Apple device, it's getting that MP4 and then it's making that 714 version of it. So that 714 version has artifacts in it already, and then it gets spatialized, and then it gets sent over Bluetooth compression. So now you've got data artifacts from just compressing it to stream it, and then you're adding artifacts on top of that so that you can listen on the device. I think that's a big part of why right now some people don't like the Apple Spatial Audio. For some people, it's the reverb. For me, it's actually more of the data compression. If I listen to spatial audio stuff back to back to back to back, it doesn't really bug me. The reverb and stuff doesn't. Every once in a while, though, I'll hit a mix, and those artifacts, they suck. I'm sorry, but it's 2025, and I feel like we've gone back over 20 years, 25 years more, and we've got that nasty artifact. So I wish Apple, Dolby, these MP4s we're creating, can we up the bit rate of them, please? They come out at 768 right now. Maybe Apple can do that with different re-renders and the way things work. But I know with the renderer here, like if I'm making an MP4 and sending it to a client to listen to Apple Music on their device, it's all locked at 768. And we can do better than that, right? Please? All right, now there is one more thing with Apple Spatial Audio for me as an engineer that I am not a big fan of, and I'm gonna show you this. We're gonna listen to this in Dolby's version, and we're gonna listen to it in stereo, and we're gonna listen to it in Apple Spatial Audio. And basically, this is how Spatial Audio handles center channel material. If you've watched any of my other Atmos videos, you probably know I am a fan of the center channel. Personally, I really like the imaging that you get from the center channel because it locks everything right to the middle. The minute you start taking something that is supposed to be center, the minute you start taking that out of that center channel and putting it into other speakers, if you are not sitting right in the sweet spot, you lose that imaging. And in some cases, I can see making an argument that that's not really a big deal, but I've just listened to so much Atmos content where I wasn't in the sweet spot because I was in a movie theater or a home theater, or like even in here in another studio with other people. The minute you get out of that sweet spot, anything in the center, it just immediately pulls to the speaker you're closest to that it's coming out of. This is Haas effect stuff, precedence effect, whatever you want to call it. It's just part of the way we perceive things. So I like using the center channel because for things like lead vocals, drums, like kick and snare, bass guitar, these are things that I want anchored right up front. And it's really hard to do that right now with these headphone versions. And I'm going to show you. So to start with, let's go to headphones. I'm going to open up my kick and snare stuff here. And I have a panner here. Let's move this to where, Hopefully you can see it. So I'm going to play with this center percentage, and we'll start on the Dolby binaural. So what we're going to hear right off the bat here is I've got the center percentage at 100, which means my kick and snare are coming right out of the center channel, only center channel. So let's listen to this a little bit, and I'm going to go back and forth between the binaural and the stereo. All right, reposition some windows a little bit. You'll be able to see right down here, headphones, what we're listening to. So we're going to start on the binaural. Atmos binaural, that is Dolby's version, 100% center. I'm going to go between that and the stereo. So there's not a whole lot of change between the stereo and the binaural. And honestly, there shouldn't be, because stuff in the front wall for me, I turn off the binaural data. So it's basically just taking that and creating a phantom center for the stereo version. Well, really for both of them, it's creating a phantom center because there is no center channel for headphones. But going between those two, it doesn't really change. Now, I'm going to start on the binaural, and then I'm going to flip to the spatial audio. To me, the punch is gone. There's no impact from it, at least not like it is in the Dolby binaural. Now, some of that is that reverb that is being added to the spatial audio. But watch what happens. I'm going to stay on the Apple spatial audio, and I'm going to adjust this center percentage. And I want you to listen to the snare drum as I adjust this center percentage. Right here, just in the 60s, it's already, it has a lot more impact to me. It feels like I'm hearing the snare. When I was on 100% with the center percentage, it sounded to me more like I was hearing the room that the snare was in. Now I'm actually hearing the snare. I'm going to keep adjusting this a little bit. That's a big difference to me, going between 0 and 100%. Now, I can get happy somewhere around, it was around 60 or so, where it was like, okay, that is pretty good. The problem, though, is when I'm getting around 60 in there, the imaging that I really like, that kind of locks that snare right in the center on speakers, it's starting to lose that. And just as another thing to show you, like I'm using the center percentage control, the divergence control here. This kind of does the same thing, although I think if I'm at 0% divergence, I will still have sound in the center. Let me I'll just do it with the divergence. So we'll start. So now we're only center where we're going to start. And here, just to show you what's going on here, let's bring over the renderer so that you can just see on the levels here as to what's going on. So when I'm fully divergent, versus the center percentage control, you're going to see it does kind of the same thing. So the main difference to me is with the center percentage, I can take it completely out of the center and go completely phantom center by adjusting that. There might be some other things about why you would use one of these controls versus the other. I used Divergence for a long time. Lately, I've been using that center percentage a lot more. I would have to go look at my notes to try and remember why I started doing it that way. Now, just to kind of compare, let's flip over to the Dolby binaural and adjust this center percentage control. And for this, I'm going to put it back into the context of the mix so that we can hear it the way we were listening earlier. Not hearing much of a difference. It's hard for me to tell what is a difference because I'm adjusting that center percentage and what's just different because every snare hit is unique. This is an actual drummer playing a real drum and not just a sample. Go figure. So you can hopefully hear, though, adjusting that center percentage, it might change things a little bit, but it's not a drastic change. Whereas when you go over to spatial audio and you start adjusting that center percentage, it's a big difference. It's the difference between having something that's punchy and something that's not. When you throw a lead vocal into here, the lead vocal, like the whole balance of where your lead vocal is even sitting can change when you start adjusting that center percentage and that divergence. This is a problem for me because if I get that vocal in the spot that I think is the right spot, it sounds great on my speakers in my studio, sounds great in the Dolby binaural and headphones, and then I go over to spatial audio and it feels like it's come down 2 or 3 dB. That sucks. That drives me nuts. So the option I have is I can adjust the center percentage or I can adjust the divergence to kind of get that balance to translate a little more, but then I start losing the imaging that I had in the speakers. And some of you, I know you're saying, well, most people are listening on headphones anyways. Well, I would agree. There are a lot of people listening to Atmos on headphones for music right now. I think there's a lot more people listening on soundbars and home theaters than you realize. And as Atmos starts moving into cars more and more, the speakers, they're going to matter a lot more. And the other thing is, as basically these binaural versions, as they continue to improve, because I'll tell you, the way that center channel works in spatial audio right now, even though I'm not happy with it, it works way better now than it did when I first started playing around in Atmos. Back then, it was like it just disappeared. It was nuts how big of a change it was. So as spatial audio improves, the way they handle the center channel, that's going to improve as well. So I don't necessarily want to kind of neuter that imaging just for spatial audio right now because spatial audio hasn't fully matured. We're getting there, but it's not there yet. But in the meantime, I do find myself compromising a little bit with that center percentage because I want it to sound good in headphones, and I know the mix is still going to work in all those other formats by adjusting that. It's a compromise, and it's a compromise I don't like making, and I don't think I should have to make, but that's where we are right now. So I hope that helps you understand spatial audio a little bit more and how it works and what some of the different things about it are that kind of bug people. And I do want to say, I do know people who like spatial audio. They like listening to things on it. When you are just listening to it, it works. And especially, if you're not like me and it's the data compression stuff, like if that doesn't drive you nuts, you're probably golden once you start listening to it. I know I didn't talk about the head tracking side of things at all today, and that's a whole other thing. And I don't think the head tracking is in there for like stupid Atmos tricks so that you can turn and look at things. I think it's a little more, well, maybe I'll talk about that another time if you guys want me to. But hope that helps with spatial audio. What do you think of spatial audio? Put your comments below, the good and the bad. Put them all down there. Thanks for watching. I think this one is getting long. I appreciate it if you've stuck around, and I'll talk to you soon.